Hello everyone, today we're looking at sociology and social policy. So we're going to first look at what is social policy, then look at the difference between social problems, sociological problems, and how they link to social policy, and also the theoretical perspective, so the role sociology plays in creating social policy. So firstly, what is it? If you look at the table on the left-hand side, what social problem can you identify? So what is the problem that is being uncovered here? How could sociology have discovered or identified this problem? So how did they go about their research? And then how might have sociologists already worked with the government to deal with this issue? So what sort of things do you think sociologists have suggested to government in order to tackle this problem? Okay, so just some definitions then. So social policy is linked to social problems and sociological problems. So just to sort of sort out what the difference is between them, a social problem involves forms of behaviour, situations or conditions which are defined as undesirable. So things like racism, educational underachievement, crime, deviance, they are all sorts of things that are considered problems in our society, and government might be called upon to tackle those problems or reduce them. The second is sociological problems. So this is where there is behaviour that we want to make sense of. So it might not necessarily be an issue or a problem in terms of it prevents us from living our lives, or it's seen as a problem by wider society. It's a sociological query or question that we're trying to understand. So, for example, why is it that people conform? So why is it some people automatically know that they should queue when they're in a shop? Why is it that some people fail at school? So it could be a problem in terms of societal problem, but can also just be a question or an area of interest. So sociological problems can overlap with social problems, but sociological problems can be literally anything. This links to social policies because social policies try to address the social problems and try to eradicate them. So a sociological problem, such as why is it that people queue at the bus stop, or why is it people queue when they're in a shop, that's not really an issue for government. It doesn't require a social policy to try and tackle that problem, because it's just a question that sociologists are trying to understand. But social problems are things that government aims to tackle, and they do this through introducing policies or sort of solutions to try and tackle those problems. So I want you to think about some specific studies that we have looked at so far in sociology and think about how they could inform government policy. So you can pick a study from anything that we have studied so far. So it could be from education, from families, from when we did research methods. I've done one for you so you can see what I mean. So I've picked Becker's labelling theory as a study. This could inform government policy because it might lead to more teacher training to help teachers become more aware of the negative impact labelling can have on students. So that's an actual policy that, that idea of giving more teacher training on that issue, that's a government policy, or could be a government policy. So I want you to think of three others. You might want to use like Rosenthal, Jacobson's study, or any area of anything that we've looked at so far from families or education, and think about what might government do as a response to that study. Okay, so then we've got the role of sociology in social policy enforcement. So we've got describing and explaining social problems, awareness of cultural differences, assessment of the effect of policies, and increase in self-knowledge. So these are all ways in which sociology helps to create, develop, and implement social policies. So I've sent you a worksheet called Sociology Stuff. Make a little summary of each of these roles that sociology has in informing social policy. So this should hopefully help you to see how important sociology is in helping government to make decisions. Now, obviously, you've seen how sociology can help government make decisions, but there are some factors that affect the extent to which sociology has an impact on social policy. There are areas where sociologists are limited in their impact. They can't necessarily force government to take on board their ideas and their studies. So what are the factors that perhaps limit them in doing this? So firstly, you've got electoral popularity. So if a sociologist suggests a policy that is not going to be popular with the electorate, the government is unlikely to listen because obviously they want to be re-elected. So it's only going to take on board ideas that are going to be popular with wider society. So if we think about, for example, say a radical feminist policy suggestion might be to do with separatism, because we know radical feminists think that men and women should be completely separate because of, they believe men are the so-called enemy and are the problem. That's obviously not going to be popular with half of the population at least, and probably lots of women also would be against this. So it's unlikely that it's going to have an impact on social policy. Interest groups. So if you do politics, you know all about interest groups, or pressure groups as they're otherwise known. So if they are suggesting a policy that is popular with interest groups or pressure groups in society, it might be taken more seriously. So for example, an example of a pressure group might be Greenpeace. They are an organisation that lobbies government to have more environmentally friendly policies. If they can get on side with a big pressure group, big pressure groups tend to have more influence with government. So if we think about the British Medical Association, that has insider status with the government. And so if they can come up with policies that are in line with what that group wants, it's more likely to be influential. Globalization. So if this policy that is being put forward by a sociologist is pro or anti-globalization, it's likely to have different impacts. So it might be that it's popular elsewhere, or it might be that it helps further globalization. And it depends on what the government thinks about this, or the political parties think about this. Do they think or believe that globalization is a good thing? So if you think about Donald Trump, obviously he's slightly anti-globalization because he's more focused on, his big campaign was about making America great again. So he might not be in favor of policies from sociologists that further the interests of globalization. Critical sociology. So if sociologists are critical of the status quo, so if you think about Marxists in particular, they're unlikely to be influential. Cost. If it's, we think that benefits should be raised for groups that are not privileged or are perhaps struggling. So you might think perhaps in terms of disabled groups. So they might suggest this policy, but actually if government feels like it can't afford it, it's unlikely to implement it. Ideological and policy preferences of governments. So again, that kind of ties into all of the other things we've been looking at. If it's in the interest of the government, if it fits in with their ideology, it's more likely to take it on board. And funding sources. So it depends where their sources have come from. So sociologists might not be taken seriously if they're funded by groups that government doesn't like. So hopefully that was just a quick run through. If you use page 243 in the textbook, that can help you develop your notes on this section. So I want you to now think about, imagine you're the Prime Minister and you're having a meeting with your cabinet. So if you don't know what a cabinet is, it's essentially pictures there. So it's the meeting that the Prime Minister has at Downing Street. All the senior ministers will sit around the table and will discuss policy issues. So what I'd like you to do is, on the next slide, I've got some different sociological studies. Some are real, some are fake. And I want you to decide whether they would actually inform the new policies that your government is going to have, or are they going to be ignored? So imagine that you are the current Prime Minister of the current government. Think about, there is a deficit to reduce. Can you afford to spend lots of money right now? You're a centre-right cabinet of the political spectrum. So it means your ideological background might be based more on tradition, and you tend to feel that welfare spending should be kept to a minimum, because your core voters don't like paying lots of tax. So have a read of those 4 real and fake studies and tell me whether you think your centre-right government would take them seriously and would implement some of those policy suggestions. Okay, lastly then, what I'd like you to do is read the information on page 244 to 246 and complete the table on the next slide. So the information is all on these sociological perspectives and what they think about social policy. So do they think social policy is useful? What kinds of social policy would they suggest? So you've got all the statements here. So I've done the first one for you. So state policies, they believe, tend to reflect the liberal feminist view. So I've put their feminism. What type of feminists would say that they tend to reflect the liberal feminist view? Because it sounds a bit like it's a criticism, doesn't it? That state policies tend to reflect the liberal feminist view only. So who might actually say that? What type of feminist? If you go through the others and just identify what perspective they are from, that would be great. That's all for now. Next session, we will look at how we would apply this to exam questions. Thanks, bye.